This is episode 93 of the After Gambling podcast. In this episode, we are talking sunk cost bias and loss aversion. Hey there, and welcome to the After Gambling podcast. My name is Jamie. I am now just a non-gambler. Maybe I'll switch it up. I'll start using the non-gambler phrase because that is probably the most accurate for me these days. I just don't try to gamble on anything. I don't try to invest in things outside of myself, and do this little podcast to try to help other people that have gotten into problems with gambling, or trying to help other people that have run into problems with gambling, or just trying to learn a little bit more about it, and do this little podcast and share what I find out, what I learn, what's on my mind is a lot of it. And a lot of the stuff comes from my day-to-day interactions. And today is a perfect example of that and a perfect segue. We're going to talk about two topics that I'm not sure if I've talked about explicitly on the podcast. I know we've talked about the concepts, but we maybe haven't named them, and we maybe haven't gone into the amount of depth that we probably will in this episode. And those are sunk cost bias and loss aversion. And I want to share with you first the kind of where this came onto my radar, because I really want to give a shout out to somebody, but have to do it in kind of a special way. This is somebody on Twitter. His name is Joseph. I will not say his last name because I will butcher it, first of all. But he had responded to something I had said on Twitter, and he shared an article that he had written on these two topics, loss aversion and sunk cost bias. And it was just really well done. And I would love to share it, but it's linked on a sports gambling site. So obviously I'm not going to create that link and put that in the show notes because, hey, that does not seem like it's a good idea, right? For my audience, that is not a good idea. But I wanted to make sure that I give Joseph credit for bringing this onto my radar. And it really was a really good article. And I'll try and summarize all of the key points as it relates to us as former gamblers, now non-gamblers, to really try to learn from it and grow from it. And so first of all, let's talk about sunk cost. And in the article, Joseph, he brings up Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a book that I've gotten into a little bit, haven't gone complete depth of it, but I've heard really good things about it. But to talk about sunk cost bias, Joseph, he uses the example from the book about two sports fans that are going to a sporting event. And so that's kind of a perfect one for our podcast, right? Where a lot of us are sports fans. Now imagine on one hand, you have somebody that paid for their ticket. They bought it a month ahead of time. And then the other person just is randomly kind of out about on the morning of, and they get a ticket given to them for free, right? So you have these two people who came about their tickets in different ways. And Daniel Kahneman in his book talks about, okay, now what would happen if a blizzard came in on the night of the game? Which of those two people would be less likely to go or more likely to stay home? And it's obvious, right? The person that just got the ticket for free is going to likely probably just say, you know what, I don't need to go. Don't really feel any tie to this game. It would have been cool to go, but they just are going to easily stay at home. Where the person that paid, especially if they paid, depending on what they paid, the more they paid, they're going to probably be just putting the family and kids in the car, hoping they have some fresh new tires on their vehicle, and they're going to drive through the snow to try to get to that game because they have more invested, right? And I hadn't heard this explanation for it, but that's one of the best ways I've ever heard sunk cost fallacy explained. It's the fact that we feel that we need to act in a certain way based on previous behaviors, right? Sunk cost fallacy. Continuing on with what is basically irrational behavior only because of what we've done in the past, the amount that we have invested into it. Now, for us, this is easy to understand. This is a lot of ways. I mean, people talk about gambling, like we continue to gamble. The gambler's fallacy I always talk about, that we just are going to get back to even, then we're going to quit. Then we're going to climb our way out of it. And ultimately, a lot of this is sunk cost fallacy. We go in and we're like, well, we got to catch up. We got to get back to even. And so we feel this investment of time and money. We got to have something to show for it, right? Or in our case, we just have to get back to even. We don't want to take the loss. And since we're talking about losses, that's the second half of this, which is loss aversion. And this is one that I was sort of familiar with the term. I've talked about it in different ways, but really it was really well written in Joseph's piece, highlighting again from Daniel Kahneman's work. And he was talking about how losses have been studied, and they show that losses hurt about twice as much as wins feel emotionally good. So the losses are like double the emotional impact of wins. And so, first of all, I think on the surface, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, looking at my life, my experiences, the wins, they quickly wear off, but the losses seem to just stick with you. They kind of stick in the back of your head. They frustrate the hell out of us, and they just really stick with us, kind of continuing for us to throw bad money or good money after bad money, chasing those losses, right? Like that's the common phrase in gambling is chasing losses, which would be sunk cost. But then the other part of it, which I don't think gets as much attention and which is the one that we'll focus on a lot here, is this loss aversion concept. And so with loss aversion, if we know that the losses hurt twice as much as the wins feel good, but we also know that just as humans, as people, and especially us gamblers and anybody that has a nice healthy ego, which a lot of us do, it's really hard to take that loss, right? And so we will go out of our way to try to dig our way out and not have to take the L. We're just so just desperate or, just ego driven to not take a loss that will continue to make worse and worse decisions along the way, just so we can kind of say, you know what, brush our shoulders off and be like, man, that was ugly for a little bit, but we got back to even. How many times was our gambling driven by that? This feeling of loss aversion, where we're down in a session, we just got to get back to even. Just got to get back to even, right? Like, because we can't take the loss. And I think that this concept that Kahneman brings up, and then Joseph highlights in his article, really highlights what really drives a lot of gambling addiction. Or I should better say, the more that I study it, the more that it better defines how I gambled and why my gambling became a problem. Now, this kind of flies in the face of some of the concepts that I've believed in the past. It doesn't completely dismiss them, but gambling addiction, we often think of it as this thing that is just beyond our control. We feel like we lose control. And while it does feel like that, and I think there's a perception for me looking back, I definitely felt like I was out of control, that I didn't have control, that it was something that was just beyond my means. This whole concept of loss aversion actually probably defines my situation, my story, and how it all played out a little bit better. It's a lot more accurate, to be honest, because going back to what I was just talking about, I didn't want to take the loss. And I was so hell-bent on not taking the loss that I was actively taking on more and more risk. I knew I was taking on more risk. And that's the thing. Like, I think sometimes we get the story told that, oh, it's just beyond our control. And we just, as things get worse and worse, we just lose control and we don't have any choice in the matter. But when I look at my life and my experiences, the opposite is true. I had choices. I was just choosing to take these riskier and riskier chances, these shots that were less and less likely to work out. And as the money stacked up more and more against me, I just made worse and worse decisions, all in the name of trying to avoid that loss, all in the name of loss aversion. And so when I look at gambling through this lens and through these two frameworks of sunk cost bias and loss aversion, all of a sudden, I just start to see my gambling and if I'm honest, a lot of other people that I've met along the way and have gotten to really know their story and what led them and what drives them and what really kind of was the accelerant to their gambling. I think so many of us, this story seems to be more accurate. And so I bring this up and highlight and share for a couple of reasons. One, because I think we're all chasing that understanding of why did we do this? What were some of those things that led to it? And while different stories along the way have made sense for me, that it's a brain disease, that it's just kind of some genetic thing, I've kind of clung to different reasonings along the way. At current, this is the best one that I can come up with for my situation. These two things just perfectly summarize what was going on. I started losing. I felt overly invested. I was the person that had paid for the ticket, and I felt a need to get back to even. I didn't want to take the loss, and I just fought and fought and fought. And each time I just dug a bigger and bigger hole, which made that loss aversion grow. And when I look at this again, it tells the story. It's more accurate. I was choosing. I was making decisions. And this really answers that question. Like I always struggle with early on, which was like, if this is a disease, if this is an addiction for me, Why was I just able to wake up one day on July 16th, 2010 and just stop gambling? Now, obviously, I started going to GA. I started going to therapy. I started opening up to other people. All those things happened. But if it was this deep-rooted thing, it would have seemed in my mind to be more complicated in quitting. But ultimately, it was just I took that loss. In my view, that's what happened on July 15th, was I had to take the loss. My loss aversion ended. It was a big L on the scoreboard for everybody that mattered in my life to see. And at that point, I had to accept the loss. I had to accept the failure of my approach to try to get out of my gambling debt. And I had to then take on a new path to get into a better place. And so, like I said, it just is a story that I'm sharing it with you because it's helping me. If it helps you, great. If it doesn't help you, then pitch it. And I'm not telling you what to believe. But I think there's just so many of us that are exploring. If you're listening to this, you're probably exploring, trying to better understand yourself by hearing other people. So maybe this is something that you'll hear this in year 1 or year 2 or day 1 or day 2, instead of being like me and starting to connect these dots 10 years, 12 years down the line. And ultimately, I think that's really the value of podcasts in general. I talked on the last one about checking out all the different podcasts and checking out all the different authors of different gambling literature, gambling research, to see what they're seeing, what they're finding, and then just run it through your own experience to try to understand what really makes sense to you, what story adds up in your mind. And then I'm going to segue here into the second half of this, which is once we understand and see these concepts, then we can start to act on them or to act in different ways. So with sunk cost bias and loss aversion, now that I have names for these, now that I can name it and see an example of where it went really wrong in my life, the hope is that now I can also spot other instances where this might pop up, where I might fall victim to this if I wasn't aware of it. If I didn't have the awareness of what this term was and how it works and how it can just spiral out of control. But now that I see it, now that I know, I can name it. I can call it out and say, oh, wait, is this an example of sunk cost? And I think if we all look at our lives through these two concepts, we can start to better evaluate all of the things in our life, not just our gambling. So we can look at everything from work to relationships to purchases, right? Like cars and things that we have in our home. I mean, when I went through minimalism stage, sunk costs, that was when it first kind of came onto my radar really kind of clearly, was because I was reading books about letting go of things that you bought. And I was like, well, it no longer serves me. And yeah, we paid for it in the past or it was given as a gift, but that's a sunk cost. That's over. It's done. You can move on beyond it. And so again, once we see these things and we can name them and understand them, I just think it really helps to make better decisions. And then the second one with loss aversion is another one that, again, it's a huge one, is are we willing to just stand up and take the L? Are we willing to kind of come forward? And I see this most in personal relationships. Maybe when I'm not at my best, whether it's with my wife or my kids or family or at work, standing up earlier on in the process and saying, hey, you know what? I screwed up here. I'm sorry. Here's what I need to do to address it. But taking that L instead of always just kind of kicking the can down the road and hoping that we can recover, we can get everything back in perfect place before anyone realizes that it was just completely unorderly and a mess, right? And so that concept of loss aversion, along with sunk cost, seems like it's something that's really important for us to learn as a lesson. They're interesting and very insightful topics that I think can help us pretty much in every area of our lives. I mean, I'm trying to run down the list of the things that are family, work, relationships, you name it. We're going to have these things, our purchases as consumers. Like, these will make us better consumers. And to realize that, okay, we don't need to continue down this path. We don't need to keep this subscription. I think I've talked about that. I bought a product during the pandemic times, which I was going to use in my business and resell it as a service. And it was a very expensive product. It was a monthly software as a service product. And I was like 8 or 9 months into paying for this product that I wasn't using. And that was sunk. I had to go, Jamie, it's sunk cost. Just get rid of it. But there was that concept of loss. Like, if I just got rid of it, then that was taking that final L. But I used these concepts to kick that and to move on. So there's really no end to this. and how this can be useful for our lives. And hopefully you find this to be very helpful and very useful in your life as well. So these are two concepts, again, wanted to share with you: sunk cost, loss aversion. Go in, dig, read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. I think that's a pretty long book. I'll give you a heads up. I think that's one that might be very, very long and pretty in-depth and maybe a little bit nerdy in a good way. But check that out, or just kind of start Googling. Find YouTube videos on these concepts. See what different people are saying about them, to see what other areas in your life these might be impacting. Because that's the thing. If we were blinded by it, or we didn't see it in our lives with gambling and that it escalated in that way, then there's a good chance that it can happen in other areas. So hopefully this, like all these podcasts, hopefully there's something you can pull out of this, apply to your daily life now, and start just living a better life after gambling. So that's going to wrap this one up. Remember, I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm none of those things. I have no letters before or after my name. It's just Jamie, a guy with a gambling problem. So use these podcasts for informational purposes. But please, please, please go use this as a bridge to go get professional help. This is not the end solution for you. You deserve professional help, so please seek that out. And then finally, music for the show is Something Elated by Broke for Free and is licensed under the Creative Commons license. That's all, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.